Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 18th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is City Council Member Ben Kallos of Manhattan. He's chair of the Governmental Operations Committee. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you, Ken, for having me, and thank you to all the viewers for watching tonight.
Ben, you're actually the first member of the new City Council, a newly elected City Council, that I've had on the show because you've introduced some interesting pieces of legislation that I want to talk about in a minute. But first, tell our viewers about your district. Who do you represent?
I represent the East Side, Midtown East, Roosevelt Island, and El Barrio. We start at 54th and 2nd, work our way up. At 79th, we go out to Lexington, work our way further up to 96th, and then I have from 96th to 100th, from Madison over to 3rd Avenue and Roosevelt Island.
So that's probably one of the more affluent districts in the city. How does it feel representing the interests of the 1% in the progressive city council?
I guess I joke a little bit that the 1% is actually in the Silk Stocking district right next door in Dan Garodnick's district. My district, actually, we have two housing developments from NYCHA. We also have a lot of 6-story walk-ups with seniors and grandparents who started there, are rent regulated, and made the neighborhood what it is. And so we have a mixed bag of different people, and one of the problems is I'm trying to make sure I get as many services as I can for those who need it. And because they're on the Upper East Side and it has the reputation that it does, they tend to get ignored. So I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure they're getting all the services they can get.
And what are the kinds of issues that you're facing?
We have a marine transfer station that Mayor Bloomberg had wanted to put into our district that we're fighting as hard as we can to get Mayor de Blasio to change course on. And one of the great things about de Blasio is he's changed so much of what Bloomberg did. We've stopped the stop and frisk program. We've overturned vetoes on paid sick leave. So we're looking for his leadership on the marine transfer station and having a truly sustainable and 21st century solid waste management plan.
Let me take a minute for people who may not know what a marine transfer station is or what a solid waste management plan is. So the sanitation department picks up the garbage in front of your house,
Yep.
And they've got to get it off of Manhattan. So they put it on barges and have it towed away, and then they get shipped out of the state. And that's pursuant to a plan, the solid waste management plan. So as I understand it, there's a facility on East 91st Street where the intention was that pretty much all of the residential waste from Manhattan would pass through there. And that way, Manhattan was taking its share of the garbage in the same way that there are transfer stations on the waterfront in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and Staten Island. So what's wrong with that?
This is the only marine transfer station in a residential neighborhood. The one in Brooklyn is in the Sunset Industrial Park. This one is literally at an Olympic training campus where over 30,000 children from all over New York City go. And within a quarter mile, you have 22,000 residents, 6,000 residents of color, 6 schools, and there's actually more people living near this one site than nearly all 6 other marine transfer stations combined. Plus, it doesn't actually honor 5-borough equity. Right now, all the residential trash from Manhattan goes to New Jersey, where they actually want our trash. And instead, we're going to take it from all over the city, all over Manhattan, take it to the Upper East Side through a residential neighborhood, drive past children on a play field. This is radioactive waste that we're going to put past these children, put it on a bar.
Radioactive waste?
That's correct. If you go to most of the transfer stations, you'll find that the Department of Sanitation has radiation detectors because as part of the regular waste cycle, radioactive materials will make it into our waste stream. So this waste is going to go past the children onto a barge, then it's going to get barged past Queens, past Brooklyn to Staten Island, then put from container to another container ship, and then sent to a landfill somewhere in South Carolina. So that seems a little less sustainable than the current process, which takes the trash straight to New Jersey. It also costs a lot less now at $90 a ton versus $238 a ton that the new process of barging would do.
Many environmental organizations and environmental justice organizations say that this is simply a pushback to force communities of color to accept more than their fair share so that Manhattan doesn't have to bear its fair share. Where's Bill de Blasio on this issue?
We're hoping that he can overturn it, but I think one important thing is I'm of the Jewish faith, and one thing I can tell you is we left eye for an eye back in the Sinai Desert millennia ago. So that doesn't really work when you're talking justice. Burdening one community doesn't help another. In fact, this one actually doesn't help anyone other than New Jersey. It will hurt Manhattan, it will hurt Brooklyn, it will hurt Queens. Sorry, not Queens, Staten Island. And New Jersey, who actually wants the trash in their industrial neighborhoods, won't be getting it anymore. So it doesn't quite make that much sense. And in fact, there are more people of color who live in the vicinity of the East 91st Street location. In fact, we have a more than 1,000-unit NYCHA development right across the street. So it'll actually be burdening more people of color at this one site than the other 6 combined.
It is a marine transfer station, and you know, you have a waterfront district. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other issues that come out of having a waterfront district?
Actually, one of the other problems that we have is we have a lack of open space. My district ranks among the lowest throughout the city for open space and green spaces. So we have this East River Park, the East River Esplanade. I share it with Melissa Mark Viverito. It goes from 60th Street up to 120th Street, and I have the honor of co-chairing the East River Esplanade Task Force with Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. And we were able to work together, and building on her decades of work, she helped identify that there was $115 million that need to be put into the infrastructure to keep the East River Esplanade from falling into the river and costing $430 million to rebuild. So as part of the new budget negotiations and working closely with the mayor, we were able to secure $35 million to rebuild the infrastructure below the Esplanade. Most people won't notice, but right now there's sinkholes, there's land bridges. So when we fix the infrastructure, the seawall, you won't see the sinkholes anymore. People won't have to go over the land bridges. And we're hoping that as part of sustainability and the fact that parts of my district are a Category AE flood zone, which means they're very likely to flood anytime we see a Sandy type storm, what will end up happening is we can revitalize our waterfront and have something that is sustainable.
You had an unusual route to election in the sense that your principal opponent was an elected official from that area, the state assembly member. But nonetheless, despite the advantages that come with incumbency even for a different position, you won the Democratic primary, and then I don't recall you're having a serious Republican race, although it's a district with a large Republican constituency. So how did you come to win?
Sure. I think that first I got my start in politics. I worked with a group called Democratic Lawyers Council, and we did voter protection throughout the state. And through that process, I actually met Assemblyman Jonathan Bing, became his chief of staff. And when I saw how things happened in Albany and the difficulties the assembly member was having, I realized part of it was because the voting records weren't online. So one of the first things I did is after I left him, I put all the voting records online in Albany, which didn't really endear me to that culture. But what it did endear me with is reformers like former public advocate Mark Green, who brought me in. I got to work with him on his policy proposals. We got to work together on 100 new ideas for New York City in his public advocates race. And it was really a great learning opportunity. After that, I got to work with Bill Samuels on founding New Roosevelt, getting rid of corrupt politicians like former Senator Pedro Espada, replacing him with idealist Gustavo Rivera, who's been absolutely amazing. And so having run so many campaigns, I had an idea of what to do on the ground and how important it was to talk to each and every voter. And then I was also the only candidate running who grew up in the district. So,
but then you caught a lucky break, right? Your opponent had a scandal.
I think that we were working really hard. We had a lot of grassroots support. all the synagogues that I went to as a kid, my classmates, my friends, all of my mother's friends and family. It was a very different sort of race. So we were building, and yes, having an opponent implode is helpful, but at the end of the day, you still have to run a solid campaign. We had a third person in the race who didn't even get mentioned when I was endorsed by the New York Times, and I did have a difficult general. I had to run against the assemblyperson a second time. He was on a third-party ballot line, and both he and the Republican were hitting me with nonstop negative mailers. But luckily, we were able to squeak through with a strong victory, and hopefully we can get a lot of the mandate done.
So some of the legislation that you've been talking up since you got into the council deals with the notion of transparency and using technology to improve the quality of government. One of those areas has to do with how the public can access information. New York has what's called the Freedom of Information Law that entitles people to ask for most information. Some things are exempt. But it's, I would say, unevenly applied. Sometimes an agency will be very responsive. Sometimes they'll sit on something for a month. What do you do about that?
So I think the first thing that we've done once I got into office is I've been fighting for rules reform in Albany for so long. Once I won my primary, I actually got out in front on the rules reforms that the city council was working on. So about 30 of us, right after our primary victories, got together and said, we want these rules reforms. And I actually got involved. I asked to help write some of them, and we were able to all stand around them. And actually, in the month of April of this year, I was pleased to be part of a city council that passed rules reform. And actually, I think it was May, but part of it was having an open API so that everyone could—
What is API?
An application program interface. It just means that somebody with a third-party application or even Microsoft Excel can download all the legislation and all of our voting records and make something more useful for it instead of being locked into the City Council website's interface. So we're doing that. We also have an open technology plan. We're hoping to make the City Council website as open and accessible as possible. And then for my own part, it's not just about technology. It's about everything. So on the first Friday of every month, any of the viewers who live in my district, and even some who don't, can stop by my district office at 244 East 93rd Street from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And we sit around in a circle and talk about what's going on in the district. So not only do I do that in person, but I also try to do that online. And so we've actually introduced, I've introduced 7 bills just on using technology to make our government more transparent.
Given the fact that you succeeded in Albany in getting them to put things online, any evidence that it has had an impact, that the behavior of the legislators is different, that the process is different, and how will we know if rules reform in the council has been a success?
I can tell you that rules reform has already been a success. I'm a new member, and I'm loving it, and I'm being told by all of my colleagues who have been there forever that we have it better than anyone before. And I'll even tell you a secret, which is I got to elect a speaker, which is a claim that many in the Assembly can't claim credit to. So we have a much more democratic process. Chairs are able to have their own hearings, and in fact, we're able to do a lot. We have our own independent websites, and people are able to comment on them, call our offices, and we're doing a lot in the communities.
We're going to continue our conversation with Ben Kallos when CityWide comes back after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with City Council member Ben Kallos of Manhattan. Ben, I've noticed over the last few years that many elected officials, among others, have embraced the tech sector, that they've come to recognize how important it is for the city's future, that it is a path for young people, perhaps people in communities of color that can aggregate resources in ways they couldn't do before. And many candidates want to be the tech sector candidate. Maybe they think that the Google founders are going to shower them with contributions. But what I've also noticed is very few of them actually understand the issues that are important to netroot activists and others, and even fewer of them come up with specific suggestions on policies that amount to something more than simply, I'm for tech. There's a reason I asked you on the show. You introduced a bill that would require the city, whenever possible, to use what's called open source software. I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. Why don't you tell us, sort of, if you can, what it is, and then we'll talk about whether it can work or not.
Absolutely. So when you buy a product, you have a choice on the license. And so you can have a license which is proprietary that handcuffs you and locks you into something. So when you buy Microsoft Word, you're stuck with whatever Microsoft gives you. You really can't make any changes to it. Then there's a free and open source software license. And what that really means is it's actually about freedom, and it's the freedom to take that program, and maybe it's LibreOffice, which is a competitor of Microsoft Office, and make any changes you want, add any features to it. Let's say you want to do something different. You can just open up the code, add that feature, and if one of your friends likes it, you can just give it to them. And if they want to make a change to it, they can do that too. And so that's the big difference. So
why would that be good for government?
Well, why it's good for government is right now the government is purchasing lots of software. Whether it's city time or something else like it, we're paying a vendor for code. And when you pay a bad vendor for bad code, we're handcuffed to that vendor and we're locked in with them because it's their code and we can't go anywhere with it. But the beauty of free and open source is that with that license, when you get the code from the vendor, you actually get to see it. You can analyze, make sure it's good code. And if you don't like the vendor, but you like the code, you can get rid of the vendor. You can hire a new vendor, and they can work on it. In fact, because it's free and open source, other cities can do it, and everyone pays a fraction of the cost. You can split the work product. And if New York City wants to add a feature, we can do it. And when we add that feature, when we do that, we can share it with a city like Boston. And in such, we can build a code base for America.
Doesn't the city have a huge installed base? Are you talking about the sort of big systems that run the payroll or the 911 system, or are you talking about retraining potentially tens of thousands of city workers who are used to using Microsoft Word?
So I think what I'm really focused on is the places where there's room for efficiency. So there are a lot of software packages in the city that are running on something called COBOL. It's a very old programming language.
I think that's probably older than you are.
It is older than me. I didn't even learn about it in school. We learned much more modern programming languages, but we're stuck paying the same vendor that's been there forever for code that needs to be maintained, and they're called legacy. And what we could be doing instead is, instead of maintaining an old code base, we could create a free and open source software to replace it. We could build it with other cities, and we could move forward and know that the expertise would be here, it would be in other cities, and we'd be able to lean on each other and share it and grow jobs around it.
So what's been the reaction in the tech community to that idea?
This actually is an idea from the tech community, or kind of the open source and free communities that came up with the idea. There's a group called Code for America that has proposed Civic Commons, which is to create a place where anyone can go and get this code. So if a city needs time management software, they can see what other cities are using and download that code and spend a couple of hours configuring it and using it. And so it's Civic Commons, it's from Code for America, and we're appreciating widespread support from all over the country.
Yeah, look, I know that some of this is high-level stuff that is not always the debating subjects of city council members. Mm-hmm. But I do want to ask you, though, you're chair of the Governmental Operations Committee, and obviously you've been giving a lot of thought to these kinds of issues, about the balance between access to government information and personal privacy. The government collects lots of information from people in lots of different ways, and there's a new school of thought on how to do data mining for big data, with government being a big consumer and a big source of that. On the other hand, folks don't feel entirely comfortable knowing that aspects of their lives that they thought were private are actually accessible in the public domain. So talk a little bit about your views on how to strike that balance.
It's incredibly important that we protect individual privacy. That's paramount, but I also think it's important to help manage expectations. The way I actually became a developer, I'm an attorney by trade, is I was involved with Democratic Lawyers Council. I found out that 2 million voters had been dropped from the state's voter registration system, and that only 10 million people of the 12 million were going to be able to vote in an election. So I got the voter file list, which is a list of every single person in in New York State who's registered to vote, their party, when they were born, their gender, sometimes that's wrong, and a list of every time they've ever voted. And I tell you, when you speak to people on the street or on the phone and you're collecting petitions or whatnot, and you tell them that you know they're a Democrat, most people say, that's private information, how dare you? But they don't know. So for the viewers at home, they just learned something new. So we have to balance the fact that a lot of information is more public than people think, and make sure that that vital private information is protected. So that is one of the balances, but I can tell you as an elected official, I have no right to privacy. Anyone watching knows that I make $112,000 a year, that I'm not taking any additional compensation for leading a committee, and they should know where my outside sources of income. I don't have any, but other people might. And we as elected officials and city employees should not have the same privacy as the residents of this city, because we have put ourselves in a place where we should be subject to public scrutiny.
What about the notion that we're in a surveillance society? Recently, several serious incidents of gun violence or stabbing in public housing, and the reaction of the public housing residents was to be demanding security cameras of the same quality that I suspect some of your more affluent constituents have in their buildings. Should we, as a city, as a society, be adopting the view that if everything is under surveillance, that people are going to behave better, or is there a right to privacy as we walk down the streets and into the hallways of buildings?
I'm the right person to ask that question. I believe in a fundamental right to privacy. I believe in anonymous speech. I believe in a society where people can move freely without being checked for identification. New York City is about to have a municipal identification legislation proposed, and actually I think it's already been proposed, but one of the
That would be an ID card for people who, because of their national status, may not be able to get a driver's license or something else.
That's correct, and one of the things that I'm fighting for is making sure that no government authority can demand to see that on site, that it can't be used for immigration status and to deport anybody, or created as a predicate for city services where there is currently no ID required. In fact, you don't need an identification to vote in New York State. You just need to sign the book. So the residents, the common person who lives in New York City, has a huge entitlement to privacy and to live their life as they see fit. The place where the privacy doesn't quite exist is to government. We don't have a right to not show our cards and not tell people how we're making decisions, because at the end of the day, we have an awesome responsibility to manage $70 billion, and if that $70 billion isn't going back to the residents of the city, we should be lowering taxes or making sure that the services are. So a lot of the transparency initiatives are aimed at eliminating corruption, eliminating graft, and eliminating waste, so that every dollar that somebody pays in their taxes actually goes back to them as services. So
tell us about the Governmental Operations Committee. It's not tasked with specific oversight like the Parks Committee or the Public Safety Committee. What's your brief? How do you intend to use the committee?
Absolutely. So we have oversight over 13 agencies. We have Board of Elections, which is constitutionally mandated to have appointments for people who are paid by county chairs. So we've actually been in a protracted battle.
Party county chairs, right?
Right. So in New York City, it's the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they get to appoint people, and it is patronage that is in the New York State Constitution. So I've actually been fighting a protracted battle with them to try to minimize the patronage below the commissioners. So the commissioners I can't do anything about unless we change the Constitution, but I want to make sure that the 350 employees there and the 30,000 poll workers are all people where they saw a notice that was publicly posted, that they're able to join, that we have people who are competent and able to do the jobs, and people who can get the job without knowing somebody or volunteering for a political party. So that's just one area. We also have oversight over New York City Campaign Finance Board, the law department. I'll tell you that in my first 100 days, I noticed that the city has contracted for $6 billion in services, and there's a potential overrun from those $6 billion in contracts of $4 billion. So we've actually asked the law department to work with us, because I'm a lawyer, and if I said to you, I'd like you to build me something or paint me something for $100, and you came back and said it's going to cost $140, you're not getting that $40. We'll have a lawsuit before I give you that $40. So it's $70 billion, but I want to make sure that every single penny is accounted for. And so that's a lot of what the transparency hopes to do.
If there was one thing that you wanted New Yorkers to know about the new city council, one thing that you wanted New Yorkers to hold the council accountable for when you all are back in a few years for evaluation as a new class, what would that be?
Exactly what you said, which is hold us accountable, hold every single member accountable. This is their city council, this is their government, and it is more participatory than it ever has been before. We have discretionary funds in the city council that we can use to support nonprofits, community groups, and make neighborhood improvements. A number of us, including myself, have done participatory budgeting where we can let people in the district decide on how they want their tax dollars to be spent. A number of people are doing more community forums and meet and greets, and whether it's First Fridays or Follow Me Fridays, which the speaker is doing, it's a new council. All of us are very accessible. Anyone of the viewers can tweet me at Ben Kallos, and they'll get a tweet back. So I think it's just hold us accountable for being as open and transparent as possible, and understand that these are your laws, and that people should be writing laws, not lobbyists, not special interests, but people. And the laws should be there not to burden anyone, not to raise revenue, but to keep people safe and for a public service. So my ask to all the viewers is, for the next 3 years and few months, please make sure that you're engaging all of your council members and making sure that they do their best with their limited time in office.
City Council Member Ben Kallos of Manhattan, Chair of the Governmental Operations Committee, thanks for joining us. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY-TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at CUNY.TV.